Today in class, we started talking about the 4 theories that psychology has for why we are motivated to do things as humans. And we got through the instinct theory, which is now called the evolutionary theory, in which we learned that an instinct is an unlearned behavior pattern that is demonstrated through every animal within a species, like a bird building a nest, for example. And then we learned that psychologists used to think that we had a ton of instincts as people, upwards of 5 to 10,000. But now we just focus mostly on the instincts that we're born with. And then those instincts fade as we grow older. We learned about Moreau and rooting and Babinski, and then obviously grasping and sucking as well. So today the goal is to get through the final 3 theories, which are drive reduction theory, optimum arousal theory, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So let's start with the drive reduction theory of motivation. This theory says that we are heavily motivated by our biological needs, not our instincts, but just things that we need to survive. So food, for example. And the really important word that you need to know for this theory is homeostasis. And homeostasis is just another word for equilibrium. Your body wants to stay at a constant equal state. So if you're at equilibrium, that means you're not hungry and you're not overly full. So if you start to get hungry, well, then that's going to throw that homeostasis off balance, and it's going to motivate you to go seek out food. When you are not in homeostasis, there are 2 other words you need to know. Our body creates needs, or we have a need, and then we have psychological drives. So the example here for the kids waiting in line for a bathroom, if you're at homeostasis, you don't have to pee, and your bladder's not completely empty to where you're thirsty. So if you start to drink a lot of water, that bladder is going to become full. You're going to have this need, this biological need to relieve your, release liquid from your bladder, and then that's going to create a drive. So I think the best way to explain this is just going through a couple of examples, and I really think this chart is helpful for following along the process that we need in order to understand this theory. So I think it'd be a really good idea for you to copy this down. Okay, so let's use another example. I'm cold all the time. Okay, so my body wants to be at homeostasis and have this like nice, comfortable body temperature. So that's my equilibrium, my homeostasis. But I start off with I'm unbalanced. Okay, so I'm very cold. My body temperature is dropping because I teach in the hallway. And then that creates a biological need. I need to get warm in order to keep my internal organs warm so that I can survive. So that need then creates what we call a drive. The drive is the psychological part of it. The need is the biological thing, like I need to be warm enough to survive. Otherwise, my body temperature drops too much, I'm going to die. But the drive is that psychological state that really motivates us to do something. So if I'm so cold that I can't focus on anything else, so I have to go get my jacket, or if you've ever had to pee so bad, you just like the only thing you think about is going to the bathroom. You can't pay attention in class, or if you're so hungry, you can't focus or something like that. That would be an example of a drive. That's what really motivates you to go and do the behavior that you need to return to homeostasis. So then for me, I'm going to go get my jacket or get a cup of tea or coffee or something that is going to satisfy that biological need and reduce my psychological drive, and then homeostasis is going to be restored. So far the big terms you need to know for this theory are homeostasis, need, and drive. I'm going to add a 4th now. These are called incentives. And incentives are external, never internal, always external influences that either make our drive even more intense or less intense. So for example, if you're starving, so you're way out of homeostasis, and you have that need for food, and you have this really strong drive, the psychological drive to go find food, and then you smell freshly baked cookies. That is going to send that drive into overload. Like you're going to have an even more intense drive than you did before. Or if any of you guys have tried to, been on a diet before, or like restricted certain things that you don't want to eat, and then you haven't eaten in a few hours, and then you go smell those French fries, or you go and smell those cookies or that cake. That's going to make it a lot more difficult for you to resist the temptation from that increase of drive that wants you to eat. If you have to pee really bad, and you already have a strong drive that you need to get out of class to go to the bathroom, and then you hear the sound of rushing water. That's an incentive that's going to make that pull from that drive even more intense. It can also be negative though. So let's say you ate too much, like you are overly stuffed and so full. So you're still not at homeostasis. You're out of homeostasis because you're too full. And then you see your favorite food or something, or even a food you don't like, it almost can make you sick because you are so full. Your body is using that incentive to like reject and like really lower down that drive. to further eat more food. So incentives work both ways, but there are always external things that can influence us with our motivation. Drive reduction theory is really good at explaining why we're motivated to do biological things, but it's not very good at explaining why we're motivated to do things that have no bearing whatsoever on our survival. So, for example, why do people feel the need to do this to their necks? And so these people every year will add a gold ring to their neck until their necks are, upwards of 1.5 feet long. So if you take these rings off, they'll actually die instantly because their neck is so weak that it can't hold itself up. Or, why do some people like crazy roller coasters that go upside down and are just like, Millennium Force or Top Thrill Dragster, or, why are some people, terrified of those things and they just hate those rides. So drive reduction theory doesn't explain why people do crazy things like that. So that is going to lead us to our third theory, which is called the optimum arousal theory. And this theory says that we are motivated to do things in order to arouse us. And again, it's not talking about sexual arousal. We're talking about attentive arousal or nervous system arousal. So think reticular formation, which is what it's in charge of in the brain. And so we each, as individuals, require a certain amount of stimulation in order to feel happy, to feel content with life. And some of us require a lot of stimulation, and some of us require not a lot of stimulation. So if you require a lot of stimulation on a Friday night, you're going to want to go out and do something exciting. You're going to be the type that's like, yes, I want to go jump out of a plane. And if you require not a lot of stimulation, then on a Friday night, you're going to want to stay in. You're going to want to never jump out of a plane because you are perfectly stimulated the way you are. And so it tends to be that if you don't have a lot of arousal, like in stimulation going on in your brain, you need to create it in your outward environment. And if your brain already has a ton of arousal and stimulation that's going on inside of it, then you require less external arousal or stimulation. So this explains why people are curious and why they play. This explains why people jump off cliffs and kayak down waterfalls, which is things that I would never do. I have a very high level of arousal naturally, so I do not need to do thrill-seeking things to feel happy or excited with my life. But I know that there are some of you that would love to do these things, and they would be really adventurous for you. And the really important term that you need to know for the optimum arousal theory is called the Yerkes-Dodson law. It's on the AP test every year, so make sure that you write this down. So the Yerkes-Dodson law is just kind of a graph showing the relationship between our levels of stress and anxiety or arousal and how well we do on things. And so if you can see this, if you're going to want to perform at your best, you're going to require a moderate level of arousal or a moderate level of stress. And so that's the key thing to remember, is that most times to be most successful, you need a moderate level of arousal in order to be successful. But there are a few exceptions. So let's say we look down here for this simple task. So if you're taking a really stupid easy test, do you want a high level of arousal or a low level of arousal? And the answer is you want a high level of arousal, because if you feel like it's stupid easy and you don't care and you don't pay any attention to it, then you're going to make silly mistakes. So it's important that when it's a simple task, your arousal is higher to prevent you from making silly mistakes. And then when you come over here to a complex task, so a test that you're super nervous about or that you're expecting to be really, really difficult, or if you're really trying to bump up a couple points on the ACT, then you want to have a low level of arousal, because if you're too aroused, that's going to make your mind blank. You're going to forget things. You're going to be so nervous that you're going to fail the test, or at least do a lot worse than what you would have had you had a lower level of arousal. So those are the three things that are really important to remember with Yerkes-Dodson, is that in most cases, you want a moderate level of arousal, but if it's a simple task, you want a high level of arousal to prevent you from making mistakes. And if it's a really complex, scary task, you want to be calm and have a low level of arousal so that you don't freak out and make mistakes this way. And does it just apply to tests? I mean, think about like athletics. If you're playing if you have a game point serve or something you're doing, or a game ending free throw shot that you're about to make, you want to be cool and calm and collected when you do that. Otherwise, you might miss. This law also kind of helps explain why some people might need music when they are working on something. So I know if I'm going to clean my house, or if I'm just doing like mind-numbing multiple choice grading, I usually like to have music on the background so that it's stimulating my brain. And then if I'm working on something complicated, like when I'm grading your FRQs, I can't have music on. I have to be in a total quiet room, otherwise I lose focus. So the Yerkes-Dodson law applies to really every activity and how much stimulation you required in order to be successful on that task. Okay, now that we've talked about those first three theories, our last theory is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we've already kind of briefly talked about this at the beginning of the year when learning about the humanistic perspective. So hopefully this will be some nice review for you. So this was from a guy named Abraham Maslow, who was basically kind of a hippie in the 60s. But he came up with this pyramid and said that, yes, we are motivated to do things, but we are motivated to do things in a very predictable pattern. And his pattern was his hierarchy of needs. And he said we are motivated to do things from the bottom up. And so, for example, if we are motivated to find friends, we're not going to be motivated to find friends unless we feel safe first or unless we're eating first. And then after we have friends, we're not going to be motivated to to be on our own or independent from our family unless we actually have a family first. School, we're not going to be motivated to do well in school and achieve unless we're getting fed every day or unless we feel safe at home. And so, again, we've talked about this at the beginning of the year, but he said those needs are met in a very predictable pattern. The problem with his theory, though, is that, this pattern isn't culturally the same across the world. So, it might be more important in Asian cultures to honor the family than for everybody to be fed. It might be shameful to admit that, you're not living in a safe place or that you're not getting a meal every time that you should. And so because that shame is more a priority to your family than admitting that you need biological help, then you might not be motivated to achieve those needs. Other critiques of Maslow's theory is that that order doesn't necessarily follow a pattern. So for example, if you I don't know, have ever skipped a meal to study for a test, or if you've ever stayed up all night in order to study for a test or finish a paper. I mean, you are neglecting your physiological needs in those moments in order to achieve something which is higher up on the pyramid. And so those things contradict Maslow's theory. And so hopefully that's just a quick review for you. But these are the 4 theories that you need to know for motivation. And then tomorrow we'll practice a little bit with them and then start applying them to specific behaviors. See you then.